Now, Rich Mkhondo is a former reporter for Reuters who was one of the journalists deployed to Hani's house. He has in the past recounted what he saw, what the period and the mood was like at the time. And I'm glad that he's joining us now for a conversation about that time. Mr. Mkhondo, thank you so much for making time for us on Newsfeed PM this afternoon. We always talk about how when Chris Hani was killed, the country nearly went into a civil war. You were there at the time reporting on this tragic story. What do you remember as the mood in the country at the time after Chris Hani's murder was confirmed?
Thanks for inviting me, Clement. I think let's start before Chris Hani was killed. Those were difficult times in our country. The white minority government was busy killing people in the name of black-on-black violence. And I lived in Spruitview, which was almost 6 kilometers away from Chris Hani's house in Don Park. And every night there was gunfire in my neighborhood where I was born in Katlehong. But before then, I think in 8 months earlier, there was a National Peace Accord. That National Peace Accord tried to bring together all the parties who didn't want an election to take place. Inkatha Freedom Party being one of them, and others. And across the country, there were lots of violence. People were being killed. I have friends who perished before then. But we were very angry at the time, even though we were journalists, because it was quite clear that there were some sinister forces in the country who didn't want the transition to democracy. So little did we know that they were planning to kill some of the leaders, one of them being Chris Hani. As for me, I covered the Convention for a Democratic South Africa, where the negotiations for a new constitution was done, and I spent a lot of times with the politicians and so on. Even before then, the Afrikaner Weerstande Beweging, AWB, invaded the talks, and I was beaten up by the AWB people who came in there. So, as I said, those were difficult times. We actually doubted whether we will see democracy as we expected it to be. It was very difficult. So when Chris Hani was killed, it was one of those darkest days. I remember very well that from my house in Spruitview, I was listening to 702, and my friend David O'Sullivan was one of the people who broke the news as I was listening to 702. And I immediately got a call from my boss to say, go there. So I went there. By the time I arrived, everyone was gathered, the body was there. We were angry. We didn't know what to do. We didn't know what to say, but we were journalists, so we just gathered information. I can never forget the cry by Chris Hani's daughter, Lindy. Even today, every month this time, when you talk about that day, I remember just the devastation of everyone who was there, including Tokyo Sehwale and other ANC leaders who were there. Yeah. For me, a month earlier, I had lunch with Chris Hani and Jackson Mthembu, who was working in the ANC communications department, and he was a leader in Mpumalanga. So it just brought the darkness of our country home.
Yeah. Sure. It was really a turbulent period in the history of this country, and you get a sense of what was at stake as you describe what happened. Do you think that there's still a lot of unknowns about this murder? I mean, Chris Hani's killer, Janusz Walusz, has now been released on parole. Hani's family and other ANC leaders seem to believe that there are more people that must answer for that murder.
Indeed, I think there is. The issue is a political leader such as Chris Hani can never be assassinated by just one lone gunman who plans this thing himself. There must be other forces, particularly the left or the right-wing white minority supporters who actually planned it. This guy definitely was financed. This guy definitely had meetings with people who were the financiers or the planners. This guy simply knew where Chris Hani lived and obviously surveilled and surrounded his houses and even knew Chris Hani's movements. I mean, he knew that it was a Sunday and Chris Hani was going to wake up in the morning and go and buy a newspaper. And that's when he actually came in and shot him. So definitely we don't have the answers answered yet. But I don't believe that black or anti-apartheid political parties could have planned the killing of Chris Hani.
Mm-hmm. How did you feel when Walush was released from prison? And there was a lot of mixed reaction, and I think there's no question that the ruling affirmed the rule of law, and we all have to respect and accept that judgment. That doesn't mean you accept that the killing of Hani was justified. I mean, in a constitutional democracy, we accept outcomes of legal processes, even if we don't like them. But I think the conversation we've had after that release was the importance to be careful not to force justice, so to speak, on people, right? The Constitutional Court may feel that justice has been served, or any other court for that matter, but as a victim or the family of a victim may not feel so. Hence, the family felt betrayed. As someone who, in the lead-up, you witnessed what was happening, on that day you saw what happened, how did you feel about that release, having reported about this from the go?
I would say defeated, I would say saddened by the laws of our country. Our constitution is a good constitution, but sometimes it's very lenient, particularly on criminals. I personally believe in the death penalty. I think this guy must have been hanged. You know, the reason is, in other countries, death penalty is the death penalty, or if it's a life sentence, it's life. In this country, life sentence is 27 years. It should be life. People should spend the rest of their life in jail. So I don't believe this guy deserved to be alive. I mean, based on what I saw there, the pain, the blood on the driveway into Chris Hani's house, it's quite clear to me that we can't let such killers actually loose.
Rich Mkhondo, a former reporter for Reuters, thank you so much for your reflections of what happened at the time. Really appreciate your time on Newsfeed PM this afternoon.